We live today in a society with all types of different people, and we encounter people who are not like us every single day. And advertising that's successful often shows a recognition for the importance of diversity and inclusion in our society. And not only advertising and brand messages do this in order to appeal to a lot of different people, but many brands think it's very important to focus on equality and justice for all people by showing a range of people in their advertising. And so other brands and advertising agencies don't do this well at all. And there's a lot of concerns in our society with the underrepresentation of Blacks and Asians and Hispanics in our advertising agencies. And when that happens, there aren't important voices at the table. So we're going to talk about some of those issues in this video. So one of the first things we need to recognize is that brand messages often don't reflect society. And one recent study by Adobe found that nearly 75% of whites believe their race and ethnicity is represented in the ads they see, but only 26% of blacks and 10% of Hispanics believed that their race and ethnicity is represented in the ads that they see. So there's a definite problem when people don't see themselves reflected in society. People don't feel important or valued. And this can also lead to stereotyping and inappropriate messages, like we can see with this Coffee Mate ad. Another problem that we see in messaging today is that ethnic groups are often presented as a homogenous group, a group where everyone who affiliates with that ethnicity is exactly the same. And that's just not true. In the United States, Hispanic identity is strongly tied to the culture of origin. So someone whose family comes from Mexico is going to have a very different perspective on things than someone who comes from Puerto Rico. So there isn't one typical type of Hispanic consumer, but rather dozens, depending on their cultural roots. And at the same time, increasing number of Hispanics are becoming more interested in the Spanish language, which is wonderful, um, but it often can mislead people who don't understand the differences in these different Hispanic cultures, because the response is, well, they all speak Spanish, so they're all exactly alike. And so it's those types of perceptions that really need to be changed in advertising agencies and branding, and really in the entire world. Many people in our society, particularly people under the age of, say, 45, have what they think of as an omnicultural identity. And this is an identity that isn't based on traditional societal and demographic labels that most advertisers tend to revert to. Instead, people embrace what has been termed an omnicultural identity that is a mix and match of cultural rituals, values, and belief systems that creates your own version of yourself. Um, and so people are now embracing a more personalized, complex, and fluid way to self identify. And for advertisers, this is a huge challenge. And so, how do agencies learn how to break out of the traditional silos that they've used to describe people and embrace this new omnicultural identity in their marketing is something that agencies are really struggling to do, but are doing better at it. One challenge is that agencies and brands often have different ways that they talk about how they reach a broad group of consumers. One of the perspectives is called the multicultural marketing perspective, and that has traditionally been seen as the idea that any market contains different cultural or ethnic groups, and that these groups can have an influence on one another. However, when it comes down to marketing, there's often one campaign developed to what's called the general market, which is the white market, and then different campaigns, even with different strategies, going to other markets, a different strategy toward an Asian market, a different strategy toward a black market. And so what happens then is when we have consumers who are in this kind of fluid area who don't identify themselves primarily by their race, but by their motivations, is that they can see a message that's may not be directed to their ethnic group, but may be a message that is important to them, that resonates with them. But if it's but then they can see another message directed to their ethnic group that is a completely different strategy. So it can be very confusing, and they really don't get, you may not get a full view of what a brand is trying to be. It's an inconsistent view, and that can be a challenge. The polycultural perspective is different from the multicultural perspective in that it doesn't assume that there's a one dominant culture like multicultural does, and instead suggests that people develop their own self identities, such as we talked about when we talked about the omnicultural society, and that younger people, especially, borrow from lots of different cultures in order to create their own self identity. And so, from a marketing perspective, we don't have different campaigns directed to different ethnic groups, but we look for those things that hold our potential consumers together, those motivations and values that are really important to them. The whole market approach is kind of a blend of multicultural and polycultural, and it delivers relevance that cuts across the broadest possible audience, and recognizing that these audiences are often unique because of their ethnicity. It's based the marketing is based on a universally shared insights that captures real world realities, values, and needs, but it can be executed differently depending on the ethnic group. So, so it can run, the same message can run in Hispanic media, in Black media, in Asian media, perhaps using non English, perhaps using English, depending on how strong that message is. And thus, it can have a foundation in large reach media and then be emphasized, reinforced in specialized media to different ethnic groups. The total market approach does two things differently from multicultural and polycultural. First, from a process place, it starts with ethnic segments as well as the general market. In general, how advertising has happened in the past is a campaign is developed for a wide audience, and then that's tweaked to be delivered to different audiences from an ethnic perspective, or perhaps the advertising is even given to an ethnic agency that doesn't have any idea what the advertising to the white audiences is. Um, and so instead, with the total market perspective, is that we start with the values of the brand that appeal to ethnic markets and then find the ones that cross into all the different ethnic markets and have a similar value, the same value communicated in the message, but executionally may be different for the different ethnic markets. The idea of perspective is about deeply understanding and leveraging ethnic consumers. And this means that the perspective of the values comes from really connecting with different ethnic groups, not on the perceptions that a bunch of white advertisers and marketers have of different ethnic groups. Um, with that, and this is where there's really a structural issue in advertising and marketing today. But this is where we can also see that somebody who takes the time to do these messages correctly um, will do a really good job. And that's in the pages section. You'll see an ad for Denny's, which is the image that we see here today, which is being noted as one company that has really understood the values of different ethnic groups and can pull them together in a way that appeals to such a broad group of consumers. In order to have a strong cultural orientation mindset, it starts with um, cultural attachment and cultural openness. Cultural attachment addresses the idea of how individuals experience and find security and comfort in different cultures, be it their own culture or other cultures they have extensive exposure to. It's the idea that we're attached not only to our ethnic culture, but also to our culture in terms of gender, our culture as a parent, our culture as an activist. So understanding all these attachments, and then it's not just a demographic descriptor, it's an attachment, is so important to have authentic advertising. Next is the idea of cultural openness, and that's the degree to which people navigate within and across different cultural groups, absorbing the elements of different cultures that worked within their preferred lifestyle, but not necessarily at the cost of pride and participation in what they consider their native culture. So we have to see how people are open to accepting parts of different cultures and knowing when that's appropriate and knowing when that's crossing a line. Finally, we need to be appreciative of the concept called color bravery that was introduced in a TED talk by Mellody Hobson. Color bravery means being realistic about race issues and addressing them directly. And this is important since many US consumers, including ethnic minority consumers, believe businesses are too concerned about offending the general population. And so they fail to take a stand on issues that matter to minority groups. And so that is also has to change. And we could take the word color out and put other types of representations in here. Agencies have to be brave about addressing issues about that are of interest to the LGBTQA plus population, who are interested in making the world better for people of with different physical abilities. So agencies just need that bravery to not run away from these controversial issues, because obviously as consumers we're running into them every day, running head on into them every day. And when brands help bring those conversations into the mainstream, that can just improve society.